Little did they know their latest target wasn't just another helpless traveler. He was death itself wrapped in a leather duster, with hands faster than lightning and eyes that had seen 1,000 men fall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A lone figure on horseback emerges from the scorching heat waves of the Nevada desert, approaching the bustling mining settlement of Silver Creek. His black coat billows in the dry wind as he passes under the town's weathered wooden arch. The residents, mostly miners and merchants, pause their daily routines to study the newcomer with suspicious eyes. The stranger, who people would later call Shadow, due to his dark attire and silent demeanor, guides his steel-gray stallion toward the town's main street. The clip-clop of hooves against wooden planks echoes through the suddenly quiet thoroughfare. Outside the Golden Nugget Saloon, 3 men in matching red bandanas, the notorious Reed brothers, stop their card game to observe the newcomer, their hands instinctively moving toward their holsters. The stranger seems to him. He dismounts with fluid grace that speaks of years in the saddle, ties his horse to the post, and heads toward the saloon's swinging doors. The sound of nervous whispers follows in his wake. Inside the Golden Nugget, the usual afternoon bustle dies down as the stranger makes his way to the bar. The establishment's owner, a burly man named Buck Thompson, watches with narrowed eyes as the newcomer orders whiskey. The bottle arrives with a glass coated in a fine layer of dust, the kind of welcome reserved for unwanted guests. The Reed brothers enter shortly after, their spurs jingling against the wooden floor. The eldest, Jake Reed, known for his quick temper and quicker trigger finger, positions himself near the stranger. His brothers, Tom and Frank, fan out to either side, creating a loose semicircle around their target. "Ain't seen you around these parts before," Jake drawls, his voice carrying across the now silent saloon. The stranger takes his time, pouring another drink before responding. "Just passing through," he says, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that makes several patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats. The middle brother, Tom, laughs, a harsh, ugly sound. "Ain't nobody just passes through Silver Creek these days, not since the Silver Strike." His take no notice, though his eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his black hat, register every movement around hand rests on his revolver, a gleaming Colt with notches carved deep into its pearl handle. The stranger sets his glass down carefully, the soft clink somehow more menacing than any threat. "First time for everything," he replies, still not turning to face his antagonizers. The tension in the room thickens like morning fog in a valley. Frank Reed, the youngest but largest of the brothers, moves closer. "Maybe you ain't heard, stranger, but Silver Creek ain't exactly welcoming to drifters. Bad for business, you understand?" His shadow falls across the bar, but the stranger doesn't flinch. Instead, he reaches slowly into his coat pocket. The Reed brothers tense, hands tightening on their weapons, but the stranger merely produces a silver coin, placing it deliberately on the counter. "For the drink," he says, finally turning to face them. His eyes, pale as winter frost, scan each brother in turn. "And a piece of advice. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." The saloon grew so quiet, you could hear a bead of sweat hit the floor. The stranger's words hang in the air like gun smoke after a shootout. Buck Thompson, sensing impending violence, begins quietly ushering other patrons toward the back door. The Reed brothers exchange glances, their pride warring with the sudden, inexplicable chill running down their spines. The afternoon sun streams through the saloon's dirty windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In Silver Creek, where violence is as common as dust, something feels different about this confrontation. The stranger's calm demeanor speaks of confidence born not from bravado but experience, the kind that only comes from surviving countless similar situations. Little do the Reed brothers know, they're about to learn why some strangers are better left alone. Jake Reed's hand hovers over his holster, his trigger finger twitching with anticipation. The stranger's words have struck a nerve, and everyone in the Golden Nugget knows what happens when Jake Reed gets irritated. The last fool who crossed him ended up fertilizing the desert flowers. "Sleeping dogs, huh?" Jake spits on the floor near the stranger's boots. Funny thing about dogs in Silver Creek, they tend to bite. He takes a step forward, close enough now that the stranger can smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. And we bite hard. The stranger doesn't move, doesn't even blink. His stillness is unnatural, like a rattler before it strikes. Tom and Frank maintain their positions, creating a deadly triangle around their target. The few remaining patrons press themselves against the walls, knowing they're about to witness either a slaughter or a miracle. "Last chance to walk away, friend," Frank says, his voice carrying a false note of concern. "Hate to see a man die over a simple misunderstanding." His massive frame blocks the path to the door, while Tom edges closer to cut off any escape route toward the back room. The stranger finally moves, but not in any way the Reed brothers expect. He picks up his glass, downs the remaining whiskey in one smooth motion, and sets it back down with deliberate care. "3 against 1, he says, his voice carrying no trace of fear. "Hardly seems fair." Jake's laugh is sharp and ugly. "Fair. This ain't about fair. This is about—" Before he can finish his sentence, the stranger's elbow shoots backward with lightning speed, catching Jake square in the throat. As Jake stumbles, gasping for air, the stranger spins with impossible grace, his coat whirling like a matador's cape. Tom draws first, but his shot goes wide as the stranger's boot connects with his wrist. The gun clatters across the floor, sliding beneath a nearby table. Frank, despite his size, moves with surprising speed, but the stranger is faster. He ducks under Frank's wild swing, using the bigger man's momentum to send him crashing into the bar. Jake, recovering his breath, reaches for his gun. The stranger's movement is barely perceptible, a blur of motion ending with Jake's own weapon pressed against his temple. The other patrons gasp at the display of speed. None of them saw the stranger draw his own weapon. None of them even knew he was armed. "Like I said," the stranger's voice remains calm, "hardly seems fair to you." He kicks Jake's legs out from under him, sending the eldest Reed brother sprawling in the dirt and spilled whiskey. Tom, nursing his injured wrist, freezes in place. Frank, still dazed from his collision with the bar, raises his hands slowly. Buck Thompson emerges from behind the bar, shotgun in hand, but his aim wavers between the stranger and the Reed brothers. The establishment owner has never seen anyone handle the notorious siblings with such ease. The stranger acknowledges Buck with a slight nod before addressing the brothers again. "Here's what's going to happen," he says, his voice carrying across the silent saloon. "You're going to walk out that door. You're going to forget you saw me. And most importantly, you're going to stop bothering the good people of this town." He pauses, letting his words sink in. "Or next time, I won't be so gentle." Jake Reed, his face red with rage and humiliation, spits blood onto the floor. "You don't know what you've started, stranger. This ain't over." The stranger's response is simply to cock the hammer of Jake's own gun, the click echoing like thunder in the quiet room. "It is for today," the stranger says. He backs away, keeping the weapon trained on the brothers as they slowly gather themselves. Jake limps toward the door, supported by Frank, while Tom cradles his injured wrist. The entire confrontation has lasted less than a minute, but its implications will ripple through Silver Creek like a stone dropped in still water. As the Reed brothers stumble out into the harsh afternoon sun, the remaining patrons stare at the stranger with a mixture of fear and awe. He places Jake's gun on the bar, slides another silver coin toward Buck, and adjusts his hat. "Sorry about the mess," he says quietly, though his eyes suggest he's not sorry at all. The whispers begin immediately. In a town where violence is currency, they've just witnessed something extraordinary. A man who moves like lightning and fights like a force of nature. But, as the patrons will soon learn, this is only the beginning of Silver Creek's reckoning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Night falls over Silver Creek, bringing with it an uneasy quiet. In his rented room above the Golden Nugget, the stranger sits by candlelight, cleaning his gun with practiced precision. The events of the afternoon have stirred something in the town's collective memory, a dark secret buried beneath years of silence and fear. Down in the saloon, Buck Thompson serves drinks to a group of miners who can't stop talking about the fight. Among them sits Marcus "Short" Wilson, a dwarf prospector who's seen more than his share of Silver Creek's history. As he nurses his whiskey, Short's mind drifts back to events from 5 years ago, events involving another man who dared to stand up to corruption. "You folks remember Sheriff Harrison?" Short asks, his voice cutting through the general chatter. The saloon grows quiet at the mention of that name. Remember how they found him? Several patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats, while others suddenly find their drinks fascinating. In his room, the stranger pauses his gun maintenance, the sounds of conversation drifting up through the floorboards. He closes his eyes, memories flooding back. A badge glinting in the sun, a man's screams echoing off canyon walls, and the laughter of those who watched it happen. Sarah Thompson, Buck's wife, enters the saloon carrying fresh linens for the guest rooms. She stops when she hears Harrison's name, her face growing pale. 5 years ago, she had witnessed everything from her kitchen window, how they'd dragged Harrison behind their horses, how they'd smiled while doing it. Sheriff Harrison was a good man, Short continues, his voice heavy with emotion. Tried to stop the Reed brothers and their boss from running their protection racket, tried to keep Silver Creek honest. He takes another drink. Fat lot of good it did him. The stranger's room creaks as he moves to the window, watching the street below. In the moonlight, he spots 3 figures skulking between buildings. The Reed brothers, nursing their wounds and their pride. But they're not alone. A 4th figure joins them, taller than the rest, his silver-handled cane catching the moonlight. Augustus Vale, owner of the Silver Creek Mining Company and the true power behind the town's corruption, listens as Jake Reed recounts their encounter with the stranger. Vale's face remains impassive, but his grip on the cane tightens until his knuckles turn white. "Harrison had a partner back then," Short tells his captive audience. "A young deputy named Michael Chase. After they killed Harrison, Chase disappeared. Some say he ran. Others say the Reed brothers got him too." He leans forward, lowering his voice. "But I always wondered." In his room, the stranger removes his hat, revealing a long scar running from temple to jaw, a souvenir from that day 5 years ago. Michael Chase hadn't run, and he hadn't died. He'd survived, trained, and waited for the perfect moment to return. Vale dismisses the Reed brothers with a wave of his cane. "Find out who he is," he orders, "and where he came from. No one threatens what we've built here." As the brothers slink away, Vale remains in the shadows, his mind working. Something about the stranger's description tugs at his memory. Back in the saloon, Sarah Thompson pauses in her work, remembering how kind Deputy Chase had been to her family, how he'd helped her husband when Vale's men tried to force them to sell the saloon, how his smile had vanished the day they killed Harrison. The stranger, Michael Chase, reassembles his gun with swift, practice movements. The weapon isn't just a tool. It's a reminder of his failure to protect Harrison, of his vow to return and set things right. Tomorrow, Silver Creek will begin to understand just how much has changed in 5 years. Short finishes his drink and stands to leave. "Stranger moved like a man with purpose today," he muses, "like a man who knows exactly why he's here." He looks around the saloon, meeting the eyes of those who remember. Maybe it's time somebody did something about the Reed brothers and Vale. Maybe it's time for Silver Creek to remember what justice feels like. As midnight approaches, the town holds its breath. In his room, Chase checks his ammunition one final time. In his mansion on the hill, Vale posts extra guards. And in their shabby quarters behind the livery stable, the Reed brothers plot their revenge, unaware that they're facing not just any gunslinger, but a ghost from their own bloody past. The stage is set for a reckoning 5 years in the making. Silver Creek's day of judgment is about to dawn, and with it, the truth behind Sheriff Harrison's murder will finally come to light. The sun rises over Silver Creek to find the town already buzzing with activity. Chase, still known only as the stranger to most, strides purposefully toward the town hall. Inside, the town council, a collection of Vale's puppets, sits in their usual morning meeting, discussing ways to further tighten their grip on Silver Creek's commerce. Mayor William Porter, a weak-willed man with expensive tastes, looks up in surprise as Chase enters without knocking. The other council members shift nervously in their seats, yesterday's saloon incident fresh in their minds. Vale's empty chair at the head of the table seems to loom larger than usual. "Gentlemen," Chase announces, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "I'm here to propose some changes." It tosses a weathered U.S. Marshal's badge onto the table. The council members stare at it, then at him, realization dawning in their eyes. "As of now, I'm assuming control of law enforcement in Silver Creek." Porter sputters, his face reddening. "You can't just... This is highly irregular. Mr. Vale..." Chase cuts him off with a raised hand. "Augustus Vale's opinion doesn't concern me. What concerns me is the fact that this town hasn't had a proper sheriff since Harrison was murdered." The name sends a ripple through the room. Councilman James Miller, the youngest of the group, goes pale. He was there that day, watched from his store as they dragged Harrison through the streets. The guilt has eaten at him ever since. "I'm instituting some immediate changes," Chase continues, pulling out a document. "First, all protection fees collected by the Reed brothers cease immediately. Second, the mining company's private security force will be disbanded. Third," he pauses, making eye contact with each council member, "you're going to tell me everything you know about Harrison's murder." Porter stands, attempting to reassert his authority. "Now see here, you have no right..." His words die in his throat as Chase moves with that same frightening speed from yesterday, suddenly inches from the mayor's face. "I have every right. The question is, Mr. Porter, do you have the right to keep covering up murder?" Outside, Short Wilson watches from across the street as several council members hurry out of the hall, faces ashen. He smiles, understanding dawn. The stranger isn't just cleaning up the town, he's going after the root of the corruption. Back inside, Chase addresses the remaining council members. "I'm appointing Short Wilson as my deputy. Any interference with his duties will be considered an attack on federal authority." He places a second badge on the table. "Times are changing in Silver Creek, gentlemen. You can either help make things right, or you can join Vale and the Reeds when they fall." Miller, still pale, but finding his courage, speaks up. "Vale won't take this lying down. He's got men everywhere, connections in the capital." Chase turns to him, and for the first time, allows a small smile to cross his face. "I'm counting on it." The news spreads through Silver Creek like wildfire. By noon, Short Wilson wears his new deputy's badge with pride, standing tall despite his small stature. Chase has him organizing volunteers, creating a citizens' militia to counter Vale's hired guns. Vale receives the news in his mansion, his rage manifesting in a shattered whiskey glass against the wall. "A marshal?" he seethes, and not just any marshal, Michael Chase himself. He turns to his butler. "Send for Judge Carlton. Tell him it's urgent." The Reed brothers, nursing their wounds and their pride in their hideout, learn of Chase's true identity with growing fear. They remember the young deputy they left for dead in the canyon. Jake Reed unconsciously touches the gun that failed him yesterday, the same gun he used to shoot Chase 5 years ago. As evening approaches, Chase stands in the sheriff's office, Harrison's old office, running his hand along the desk where his mentor once worked. The drawer still holds Harrison's personal effects, a family Bible, a photograph of his wife and daughter back east, and a letter naming Chase his successor should anything happen to him. Short enters with a stack of papers. Found these hidden in the basement. Records of all Vale's dirty dealings, protection rackets, claim jumping, forced sales. Harrison was building a case. Chase nods, unsurprised. Even in death, Harrison is helping bring justice to Silver Creek. The sun sets on a town holding its breath. Vale's mansion glows with lamplight as he meets with Judge Carlton, plotting to give Chase's actions a veneer of illegality. The Reed brothers clean their guns, preparing for what they know will be their last stand. And in the sheriff's office, Chase and Short Wilson plan how to dismantle a corrupt empire without destroying the town it's built upon. Tomorrow, the real war for Silver Creek's soul begins. As dawn breaks over Silver Creek, Chase begins implementing his plan. In the town square, he oversees the training of citizen volunteers, teaching them to handle firearms with the same precision he learned during his 5 years of preparation. Short Wilson moves among the ranks, correcting stances and offering encouragement to those who struggle. Remember, Chase calls out to the assembled townspeople, Vale's men are trained killers, but they fight for money. You're fighting for your homes, your families, your future. His words carry across the square, reaching even the ears of those watching from windows and doorways. Among them, Sarah Thompson feels hope stirring for the first time in years. Vale watches the proceedings from his mansion through a brass telescope, his face twisted with contempt. Judge Carlton stands beside him, nervously adjusting his collar. "This is irregular, Vale," the judge mutters. "A U.S. Marshal has considerable authority." "Every man has a price," Vale replies, closing the telescope with a sharp snap. "Even marshals, especially ones with personal motivations." He turns to his desk, pulling out a stack of documents. "Send these to the Capitol. Let's see how our righteous lawman handles having his authority questioned." Down in the square, Chase divides the volunteers into groups. Some will guard key positions around town, others will patrol in shifts. But it's the special unit he's most interested in. Men and women chosen for their steady hands and cool heads, trained specifically to counter the Reed brothers. Jake Reed, watching from the shadows of an alley, feels his confidence wavering. The stranger, no, the marshal, moves with the same deadly grace as yesterday, but now there's something else. Purpose. Direction. The kind of determination that comes from years of planning. "Your shot hit him clean 5 years ago," Tom Reed whispers, noticing his brother's unease. "Nobody survives a bullet to the head." But Jake remembers the sound the bullet made, not the solid think of a killing shot, but the glancing blow of a near miss. He'd been too confident, too careless. Sarah Thompson brings water to the volunteers, pausing near Chase. "I remember you now," she says quietly. "You used to take your coffee with honey instead of sugar. Said it reminded you of home." Chase's stern expression softens slightly. "Some things don't change, Mrs. Thompson." As the morning progresses, Short Wilson notices changes in the town. People walk taller, speak more freely. The fear that's gripped Silver Creek for 5 years begins to crack. Even the miners, usually Vale's most reliable supporters, watch the training with interest. Vale's messenger returns from the Capitol by noon, looking troubled. "Judge Carlton's documents weren't enough, sir. The governor's office confirms Chase's authority. Seems he's been building support for this operation for years." Vale's rage manifests in a backhanded slap that sends the messenger sprawling. In the sheriff's office, Chase and Short review Harrison's hidden documents. "Vale's been smart," Short observes. "Never gets his own hands dirty." Chase nods, but his eyes gleam. "That's why we're not just after Vale. We're taking down his entire operation piece by piece." The afternoon brings the first test of the new order. 2 of Vale's collectors arrive at the general store, demanding their usual payment. They find themselves facing not just the shopkeeper, but 4 armed citizens. The collectors retreat, but everyone knows this is just the beginning. As evening approaches, Chase gathers his most trusted volunteers in the sheriff's office. "Tomorrow," he announces, "we start taking back what they stole. Every claim they jumped, every business they muscled in on, we're setting it right." He rolls out a map marked with red circles, Vale's properties, legitimate and otherwise. The Reed brothers receive their orders from Vale as darkness falls. "Kill him," Vale commands. "Kill him. Kill Wilson. Kill anyone who stands with them. By sunrise, I want this rebellion crushed." But Jake Reed sees something in Vale's eyes he's never noticed before. Fear. In his room above the saloon, Chase sits cleaning his guns. On the table before him lies Harrison's badge, a reminder of why he's here. Sarah Thompson brings him coffee, with honey, and pauses at the door. "What if Vale brings in more men?" she asks. Chase's reply is calm but determined. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. The more men he brings, the more witnesses to his crimes. The more desperate he becomes, the more mistakes he'll make." He looks up at her. "5 years ago, I learned that one man can't stop them. But a town united? That's something else entirely." The night settles over Silver Creek like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Tomorrow will determine whether Chase's plan succeeds or if Vale's corrupt empire will claim another life. But this time, the marshal isn't fighting alone. Vale's first strike comes before dawn. 24 hired guns surround the sheriff's office, expecting to catch Chase and his deputies sleeping. Instead, they find themselves caught in a carefully laid trap. Chase's volunteers, positioned in surrounding buildings, hold their positions until the signal. "Last chance to walk away," Chase's voice rings out from the darkness. "Vale's not worth dying for." The hired guns exchange uncertain glances, their confidence wavering. Before they can decide, Jake Reed pushes through their ranks, his face twisted with rage and fear. "You should have stayed dead, Chase," Jake shouts, his voice cracking. "We made sure to dig the grave deep enough." Chase's response comes not in words but in action. A single shot rings out, and Jake's gun flies from his hand, the barrel bent from the impact of Chase's bullet. The battle erupts in earnest. Chase's volunteers prove their worth, their disciplined fire keeping Vale's men pinned down. Short Wilson coordinates the defense from the hotel roof, his small size making him a difficult target, as he directs his people with hand signals. Vale, watching from his mansion, realizes his first assault has failed. In a fury, he sends for his ace in the hole, a notorious gunslinger known as the Rattler, famous for his speed and accuracy. The messenger rides out of town at full gallop, carrying Vale's desperate plea and a bag of gold. Back in town, the fighting dies down as Vale's men retreat, leaving 3 of their own dead and several wounded. The Reed brothers vanish into the morning mist, their reputation in tatters. Chase surveys the damage, 2 volunteers wounded, but none killed. The town's first test has been passed. Sarah Thompson tends to the wounded in the saloon, now converted to a makeshift hospital. "They'll be back," she says as Chase enters. "Vale won't stop until—" She trails off, seeing the look in Chase's eyes. "That's exactly what I'm counting on," he replies. Throughout the morning, Chase and Short Wilson fortify key positions around town. The mining office, the assay office, the bank, each becomes a strong point in their defense. But Chase seems distracted, as if waiting for something. Short notices his frequent glances toward the South Road. "Expecting company?" Short asks, adjusting his deputy's badge. Chase nods slowly. "Vale's predictable. Right now, he's calling in every favor, hiring every gun he can find. But that works for us." He hands Short a sealed envelope. "When the time comes, deliver this to the state marshal's office." By noon, the town is buzzing with tension. Vale's remaining men have withdrawn to his mansion, where the sound of breaking glass and furniture suggests their employer's deteriorating mental state. Judge Carlton attempts to flee town, but finds every road watched by Chase's volunteers. The afternoon brings what Chase has been waiting for, riders approaching from the south. But instead of hired guns, it's a group of miners from Vale's most distant claims. They march into town led by James Miller, the young councilman who finally found his courage. "Vale's been cheating us for years," Miller announces to the gathered crowd. "We found proof." Vale, informed of this new betrayal, finally snaps. He orders the Reed brothers to burn the town's records office, destroying any evidence of his crimes. But Chase has anticipated this too. The real records, including Harrison's carefully gathered evidence, are safely hidden away. As evening approaches, Chase calls a town meeting in the church. "Tomorrow," he announces, "Vale will make his big push. He'll throw everything he has at us." He looks around at the determined faces. But that's not the real battle. The real battle is for the soul of Silver Creek. Are we a town that bows to tyranny, or one that stands for justice? The silence that follows is broken by Sarah Thompson's voice. Harrison believed in this town, believed in the law. Others join in, sharing stories of Vale's oppression, of Harrison's kindness, of their own shame at staying silent for so long. Chase listens, his hand resting on his gun. Tomorrow will bring violence, but tonight has brought something more important. Hope. The same hope Harrison tried to nurture 5 years ago. In his mansion, Vale receives word that the Rattler has accepted his offer and is riding hard for Silver Creek. The notorious gunman's reputation equals Chase's, and Vale's twisted smile returns as he imagines the coming showdown. But in the growing darkness, Chase stands at Harrison's grave, Short Wilson beside him. Vale thinks tomorrow is about fast guns and hired killers, Chase says quietly. He still doesn't understand. Tomorrow isn't about who's fastest, it's about justice. And justice is patient. Justice remembers. The night settles over Silver Creek, and with it comes the certainty that tomorrow will change everything. In the saloon, the volunteers check their weapons one final time. In the mansion, Vale plots with his remaining loyal men. And somewhere on the dark road south, the Rattler rides toward a date with destiny. Dawn breaks on Silver Creek with an otherworldly stillness. The Rattler arrives first, his black stallion kicking up dust as he rides down the empty main street. His reputation precedes him. 30 men dead in duels, each killed with a single shot. Vale watches from his mansion window, a cruel smile playing on his lips as his ultimate weapon enters the fray. Chase observes the new arrival from the sheriff's office, his expression unchanged. "Right on time," he murmurs. Short Wilson, organizing ammunition nearby, glances at his friend. "You knew he'd come?" Chase nods slowly. Vale's running out of options. The Rattler was inevitable. The Rattler takes position in front of the saloon, his long coat dusted with desert sand. "Marshal Chase," he calls out, his voice carrying across the silent street. "Let's make this simple. You and me, here and now. The winner takes Silver Creek." His hand hovers near his custom-made revolver, its grip wrapped in rattlesnake skin. But Chase doesn't emerge. Instead, his voice rings out from multiple directions, the volunteers hidden in strategic positions around the square. "Silver Creek isn't a prize to be won in a duel," Chase responds. "And I didn't come back for a gunfight. I came back for justice." The Rattler's composure cracks slightly. He's used to controlling these situations, to forcing confrontations on his terms. "Hiding behind townspeople, Marshal? That's not very sporting." His mockery dies as he spots movement in every window, on every rooftop. Dozens of armed citizens, all training their weapons on him. Vale, watching the scene unfold, realizes his miscalculation. He'd bought a gunslinger to fight a lawman, but Chase had turned Silver Creek into an army. The Reed brothers, skulking near the livery stable, sense the changing tide and begin quietly saddling their horses. 5 years ago, Chase's voice continues, this town watched in silence as good men died. Today, they're choosing to stand. Against Vale, against you, against anyone who thinks money and fear can overrule justice. The Rattler turns slowly, taking in the grim faces surrounding him. For the first time in his career, his legendary speed means nothing. Vale's mansion erupts in activity as he orders his remaining men to support the Rattler. But, as they rush into the street, they find themselves facing not just armed citizens but miners from the outlying claims, storming into town with picks and shovels. James Miller leads them, carrying Harrison's badge high. The Rattler makes his choice. In a blur of motion, he draws and fires at Chase's last known position. The shot rings out, but instead of chaos, it brings only silence. Then, impossibly fast, Chase appears behind him, gun pressed to the gunslinger's head. "Harrison was faster than you," Chase says quietly. "They shot him in the back because they couldn't face him honorably." Vale, seeing his last hope disarmed, breaks. He rushes from his mansion toward the stables, only to find Short Wilson waiting, deputy's badge gleaming. "Going somewhere, Mr. Vale?" the dwarf asks, shotgun steady in his hands. The Reed brothers, attempting to flee, find every exit from town blocked by Chase's volunteers. Jake Reed, his nerve finally breaking, throws down his gun. "It was Vale's orders," Yanni shouts. "I'm everything, Gary Harrison, the protection rackets, all of it." His brothers follow suit, their weapons clattering in the dust. Sarah Thompson, watching from the saloon doorway, sees Vale's empire crumbling in real time. The fearsome businessman, the ruthless Reed brothers, the legendary Rattler, all undone not by superior gunplay, but by a town finally finding its courage. Chase marches Vale toward the sheriff's office, past the assembled townspeople. Some cheer, others weep, but most simply watch in silence as justice, 5 years delayed, finally arrives in Silver Creek. Short Wilson follows, herding the Reed brothers ahead of him, his small stature now commanding respect rather than derision. The morning sun climbs higher, illuminating a changed Silver Creek. The Rattler, his reputation shattered, rides out of town without looking back. Vale's mansion stands empty, its gates open for the first time in years. And in the sheriff's office, Chase pins Harrison's old badge to his chest, the circle finally complete. But this isn't the end. It's a beginning of healing, of rebuilding, of transforming Silver Creek from a town ruled by fear into one governed by law. The price of justice, as Chase well knows, isn't paid in gunfights and showdowns. It's paid in the daily courage of ordinary people standing together against tyranny. Chase wastes no time implementing justice in Silver Creek. In the sheriff's office, he methodically documents Vale's crimes, with Short Wilson recording testimonies from townspeople finally free to speak. The evidence mounts: extortion, claim jumping, murder, a decade of corruption laid bare. Vale sits in his cell, his empire crumbling hour by hour. Outside, citizens reclaim their stolen properties, miners return to their rightful claims, and businesses tear up their protection contracts. The Reed brothers occupy adjacent cells, their swagger replaced by bitter silence. The state marshal's office will be here within days, Chase informs Vale through the cell bars. Until then, you'll have plenty of time to think about Sheriff Harrison. Vale's response is a cold stare. "You've won nothing, Chase. Silver Creek was built on silver and blood. It'll always need men like me." Sarah Thompson arrives with news from the town council. "They've voted to dissolve Vale's mining contracts," she announces. "The independent miners can work their claims again." Chase nods, remembering how Harrison had fought for those same miners' rights 5 years ago. The town undergoes a rapid transformation. Shopkeepers openly discuss Vale's extortion schemes. Miners share stories of jumped claims and midnight threats. Each revelation strengthens the case against Vale and his conspirators. But Chase knows the hardest part lies ahead: ensuring justice outlasts vengeance. James Miller, the reformed councilman, brings a stack of documents to the sheriff's office. "Vale's business records," he explains, "hidden in a false wall of his mansion, shows every bribe, every theft, every murder." His hands shake as he sets them down, including Harrison's. Chase reviews the documents with Short Wilson. The evidence is damning. Vale had ordered Harrison's death not just for investigating the corruption, but because the sheriff had discovered Vale's greatest secret. The silver mine was nearly depleted. Vale's empire was built on borrowed time and stolen claims. In their cells, the Reed brothers begin turning on each other. Jake accuses Tom of cowardice. Tom blames Frank for their capture, and Frank threatens to reveal even darker secrets about Vale's operations. Chase lets them talk, each confession adding to the case against their former employer. Sarah brings coffee, with honey, to Chase as he works through the night. "The town's changing," she observes. "People are remembering who they were before Vale." Chase looks up from Harrison's badge, which he's been absently polishing. They're remembering who they can be. Dawn brings unexpected visitors. Miners from neighboring towns, having heard of Vale's fall. They carry similar stories of corruption and violence. Chase realizes Vale's influence stretched farther than anyone suspected. Short Wilson begins mapping the connections, revealing a network of crime spanning the territory. Vale receives the news of his empire's unraveling with eerie calm. "You think this ends with me, Chase?" There will always be another Vale, another gang. The West wasn't built on justice. It was built on strength. Chase's reply is measured, no. It was built on courage. Harrison taught me that. The town council convenes an emergency session, voting to establish new laws protecting minors' rights and preventing future monopolies. Chase attends, watching democracy replace corruption. Harrison would have been proud, he thinks, seeing Silver Creek's citizens reclaim their voice. As sunset approaches, Chase posts guards around the jail. Vale's money might still buy loyalty from desperate men, but the real protection comes from the townspeople themselves, volunteering for watch duty, determined to prevent any attempt to subvert justice. Short Wilson organizes the evidence for transport, preparing for the state marshal's arrival. It's not just about Vale anymore, he tells Chase. This could expose corruption across the territory. Chase nods, understanding the implications. Harrison's death might lead to justice far beyond Silver Creek. The day ends with a quiet ceremony at Harrison's grave. The townspeople gather, placing flowers and personal tokens of remembrance. Chase stands apart, watching Silver Creek heal itself. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. But tonight, justice has found its first real foothold in 5 years. The state marshal arrives at dawn with a dozen deputies, dust coating their long ride from the capital. Chase meets them outside the jail, Harrison's badge gleaming on his chest. State Marshal Anderson, a grizzled veteran, eyes the town suspiciously, having heard too many stories of Vale's influence. "Quite a mess you've stirred up, Chase," Anderson remarks, dismounting. "Half the territory's talking about Silver Creek." Inside the jail, Vale sits motionless, listening to the arrival of his fate. The Reed brothers, however, grow increasingly agitated as hoofbeats echo through the streets. Chase leads Anderson through the evidence, methodically presenting the documents, testimonies, and financial records. Short Wilson contributes key details, his perfect recall of dates and figures impressing the state lawman. "Harrison started this investigation," Chase explains. "We just finished it." Vale's transfer to state custody begins as townsfolk gather to watch. As deputies lead him out, Vale locks eyes with Chase. "You think this is justice?" he sneers. "This town will die without me. The silver's running out. They just don't know it yet." Chase's response is calm. "Then they'll build something new, something honest." Sarah Thompson approaches Chase as Vale's prison wagon departs. "The state marshal's men found more bodies in the old mine," she reports quietly. 3 prospectors who disappeared last year. Vale's crimes keep growing." Chase nods, having expected this. Evil, once rooted deep, reveals itself slowly. The Reed brothers follow Vale into custody, their swagger replaced by desperate bargaining. Jake Reed, finally broken, offers to testify about other crimes, other bodies, other corrupt officials across the territory. Anderson listens, understanding that Silver Creek's corruption might lead to an even bigger investigation. That afternoon, Chase calls a town meeting. The church is filled with citizens eager to hear about Silver Creek's future. "Vale's gone," he announces, "but our real work begins now. A town isn't just buildings and mines, it's people. People who choose justice over fear, every single day." James Miller stands to propose a new town charter, one protecting minors' rights and preventing any future monopolies. The vote is unanimous. Short Wilson, still wearing his deputy's badge with pride, records the historic moment in the town ledger. As sunset approaches, Chase visits Harrison's grave one last time. The townsfolk have adorned it with fresh flowers and a new marker identifying him as Defender of Justice. Anderson joins him there. "You've done good work here, Chase," the state marshal says, "but there's more corruption out there. The territory needs men like you." Sarah finds Chase packing his saddlebags that evening. "You're leaving?" she asks, though she already knows the answer. Chase adjusts Harrison's badge on his chest. Vale was right about one thing. There are others like him out there. Harrison taught me that justice isn't just for one town. The next morning, Silver Creek watches as Chase mounts his horse. Short Wilson stands tall despite his small stature, new sheriff's badge catching the sunlight. "We'll keep it honest," he promises. Chase nods, knowing the town is in good hands. As Chase rides out, he passes the town sign. Below it, someone has painted new words: Home of Justice. The morning sun catches his face, highlighting the scar that never quite healed. But some wounds, he's learned, serve a purpose, reminding us why we fight, why we persevere. Sarah Thompson watches him disappear into the desert heat, remembering his words. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about building something worth protecting. Silver Creek would do just that, one day at a time. The desert sun sets on Silver Creek one last time, as Chase rides toward new horizons. But the story he leaves behind resonates through the territory like thunder after lightning. Word spreads of how one man's return sparked a revolution of justice, inspiring other towns to stand against corruption. In Silver Creek, life transforms. Short Wilson proves himself a capable sheriff, his small stature belying his enormous courage. Under his watch, the town establishes a new order. The mining claims run honestly now, with former Vail employees working alongside independent prospectors. State Marshal Anderson's investigation expands, using Vail's records to uncover corruption across the territory. One by one, other criminal empires fall, their foundations built on the same rotting timbers of greed and fear. The Reed brothers' testimonies prove invaluable, trading their knowledge for lighter sentences. Sarah Thompson turns the golden nugget into a symbol of the town's transformation. Where once Vail's men terrorized patrons, now miners and merchants gather freely, sharing stories of Silver Creek's liberation. Harrison's photo hangs behind the bar, alongside the bent gun Chase took from Jake Reed. James Miller leads the town council in drafting new laws, ensuring no single person can ever again control Silver Creek's destiny. The silver might be running out, but the town's spirit grows stronger. New businesses emerge: a railroad office, a cattle company, a school. Vail's prediction of the town's death proves as hollow as his empire. Chase's legend grows with each passing month. Tales spread of the lawman who returned from the dead, who turned a town of cowards into an army of citizens. But those who were there know the truth. The real hero wasn't Chase's gun, but Harrison's legacy of justice and courage. 1 year later, a letter arrives for Short Wilson. Chase writes of other towns, other battles, other triumphs of justice over tyranny. But he always ends with the same message. Silver Creek showed us all what's possible when good people stand together. Harrison knew it. Now everyone knows it. Sarah keeps Chase's coffee cup still marked with traces of honey. Sometimes, when the wind blows right, she swears she can hear hoofbeats in the distance. But Silver Creek no longer needs a savior. Its people have learned to be their own heroes. The old-timers still tell the story of the stranger who wasn't a stranger, of the town that found its courage, of justice delayed but not denied. They tell it to remind themselves and their children that even in the darkest times, one person's stand for justice can light a fire that burns forever. And somewhere out there, Chase rides on, Harrison's badge still gleaming on his chest. The West is wide and corruption runs deep, but justice has a new champion. The legend of Silver Creek rides with him, a testament to the power of memory, courage, and the undying spirit of those who stand against tyranny. In the end, Vail was wrong about everything. Silver Creek didn't die. It was reborn. The silver in the ground might fade, but the silver lining of justice shines eternal. And in every town where people gather to resist corruption, they whisper the story of the lawman who returned, the town that stood up, and the price of justice finally paid in full. As the sun sets on our tale, Harrison's grave bears fresh flowers every day, tended by a town that will never forget. And if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you might hear the echo of hoofbeats reminding Silver Creek that justice, like memory, never truly dies. Silver Creek stands transformed. The old silver mine closed years ago, but the town thrives through ranching, trade, and a newly established railroad depot. The red paint that once marked Vale's tyranny has faded, replaced by fresh colors chosen by free citizens. Short Wilson, still serving as sheriff, keeps Harrison's original case files in a place of honor. Beside them sits a newspaper clipping describing Vale's death in prison, his empire nothing but dust. The Reed brothers served their sentences and vanished into obscurity, their names now cautionary tales. Sarah Thompson's saloon becomes a gathering place for travelers who want to hear the story firsthand. She tells it well, describing the stranger who brought justice with quiet determination. Some claim it's just legend, but the older residents touch their scars and remember. James Miller, now mayor, leads the town council with transparency and wisdom. Under his guidance, Silver Creek establishes itself as a model of frontier democracy. Other towns send representatives to study their laws, their methods, their transformation from corruption to justice. One autumn morning, a rider appears on the horizon. The townsfolk recognize the silhouette immediately, the straight-backed posture, the familiar hat, the badge catching sunlight. Chase returns, older but unbowed, his scar a silver line against weathered skin. He finds a different Silver Creek. Children play freely in streets once ruled by fear. The jail, rarely occupied, serves mostly to house drunks and rowdy cowboys. Harrison's grave, now centerpiece of a proper cemetery, bears the inscription, "His justice lives on." Chase brings news of other victories, other towns freed from corruption. But Silver Creek remains special, the place where justice found its second wind, where one town's courage sparked a territory's transformation. Short Wilson greets his old friend with fierce pride, sharing stories of their continuing legacy. Sarah serves Chase coffee with honey just like before. They speak of Harrison, of Vale, of how revenge became redemption. The townspeople gather, not in fear, but celebration, to welcome back the man who showed them their own strength. That evening, Chase visits Harrison's grave one final time. "We did it," he says quietly. "Your death wasn't the end. It was the beginning." Behind him, Silver Creek's lights twinkle like earthbound stars, each one representing a family living free from fear. Before leaving, Chase hands Short Wilson a packet of letters, evidence of new corruption in the territory's capital. But this time, Silver Creek's sheriff just smiles. His deputies, trained in justice rather than violence, stand ready. The town has learned to fight its own battles. As Chase rides out for the last time, the setting sun paints Silver Creek in shades of gold. The town sign now reads, "Silver Creek, where justice found its home." Below it, fresh paint declares, "All welcome who seek truth." The legend ends, but the legacy lives on. In saloons across the territory, people tell the tale of Silver Creek, how one man's quest for justice awakened a town's courage, how memory became redemption, and how the spirit of a murdered sheriff lived on through those who dared to stand for what was right. For in the end, justice isn't about the gun, but about the heart that guides it. Silver Creek learned that lesson in blood and redemption, and now stands as a beacon to all who would choose courage over fear, truth over power, and justice over vengeance. The hoofbeats fade into desert silence, but their echo remains in the spirit of Silver Creek, a town that died and was reborn, where justice found its second chance, and where the price of freedom was paid in full measure by those who dared to stand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.